Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus. It's me, Colin. My name is Colin Moriarty. Good to see you guys. Good to be here with you today. Hope all is well in your lives. We're recording this a little late on Monday. It's been a long day. First of all, quite a bit of interesting information came to light today about trophies and all the rest, which is exciting for the PS Classics and the a la carte offerings, especially, which I'm excited about, like Wild Arms and Siphon Filter. But also, I was outside for 3 hours working in the yard. It's supposed to rain all week starting tonight. So I needed to get the lawn cut and everything just kind of straightened up. I think I was in the pool for like 3 straight days, basically, and that's why I'm so tan. My Italianness comes out in the sun, of course. Got a little burnt on my kneecaps. I was floating around in a float reading Game of Thrones, the first of the George Martin books, and I read like 150 pages in one go in the pool, just floating around, but my legs were exposed, so I have like this like 2-inch. It's not even really that bad, but more burn than the rest of my body. Anyway, I hope you're all doing well and that the weather is also glorious for you as it was this weekend for me. I am here with you today on my own. Maybe you're watching, maybe you're listening, to finally talk to you about my top 25 PlayStation 4 games. The list is right here. I have the list right here. And this is actually the exact copy that I brought to the show with me when we recorded episode 200 of Sacred Symbols in Richmond, Virginia, live. And so this is the list I had and that I was checking off on the stage as we were going. So I thought I'd keep it and go through it with you guys so you can see where my votes had lined up. And I think I'm interested above all else in providing a little, or what I was interested in, I guess I should say, was providing a little bit of texture to our list, our collective list. I wanted to get some indies in there. I wanted to get some various more obscure games, and I really like my list. I think you guys are going to like it too, but that'll be up to you. So we'll just go from 25 to 1, and I won't spend too much time on any of them. We'll just see what I have to say. I have nothing prepared other than the list, so we're just going to go through them. I've been excited to do this, by the way, because I've wanted you guys to see what I've put on the list, and I think I could be wrong about this, but I'm pretty sure the fewest number of my games made the list. So, all right, number 25. I put Wolfenstein The New Order at number 25. 2014, PS3 and PS4, but of course we're really counting this as a PS4 game. I think that out of all of the games, I reviewed so many games at IGN, that The New Order might be the one that I underscored the most. I think I gave it like a 7.5 or something. Now, the intro to the game is really laborious and pretty bad. Like, I can't believe that they thought that the way they begin the game and how long it takes and all that was a good idea for this game. But underneath that really bad intro was this really stellar reimagining of Wolfenstein. Now, of course, we have to think back. Wolfenstein was an id game, right? Pre-Doom, really considered the first-person shooter. And at least as we understand first-person shooters. And it was pretty rudimentary. And I think the first Wolfenstein 3D, is actually a really good game. I finally played it through pretty completely on PS3, actually, when it came out back in 2009. But, Wolfenstein has gone through different studios and different hands. It did Wolfenstein, and then it went to Activision for a while, and people messed around with it. I think Raven even made a Wolfenstein game, and then finally it was bound to Machine Games. Now, this happened because Bethesda acquired id, and therefore Bethesda acquired all of id's different IP and its licenses and its catalog and all the rest. So this allowed them to explore some different stuff that went to sister studio Machine Games, which was created as a shooter studio over in Europe. And this was their first game. This was the game that they delivered. In my opinion, for my tastes, I think out of the Bethesda purchase and making them basically a Microsoft series of teams, the biggest loss for me was Machine Games. because for me as a gamer, I don't think for the general gamer, I don't think for the deal, but for me, losing Bethesda Game Studios and Arcane, I think that hurt a lot of people, but that didn't hurt me. This hurts me as a PlayStation gamer. Like, I kind of hope, although I think it's not going to happen, that Wolfenstein 3 would be on PlayStation because the first two were on PlayStation as well. But I think Wolfenstein The New Order is a really nice reimagining of an old and important IP from the early 90s. The great first foray for a new studio. And I must say, World War II kind of trite. I think we all agree. And The New Order doesn't take place during World War II, but it revolves around the Nazis. And if the Nazis won World War II, so it comes from that alternate history point of view. I think that can be trite for a lot of people. I don't think it always would work, but this game works a great deal. And so I wanted to give it a shout out. Wolfenstein The New Order. That's my 25th game. 24, I put the game Mercenary Kings from 2014 as my 24th best PS4 game. This is, of course, by Tribute Games. You would know them. They did that game, it's like Skyhook or something, but they did something that hasn't been actually launched on PlayStation. I don't know why yet, but Panzer Paladin, which was a kind of an old school game that came to Switch and PC, I think last year or 2 years ago now. Mercenary Kings was of the era on PlayStation 4 and PlayStation Vita, because Mercenary Kings came to Vita later. I didn't play it there. But it was of that era where there was something special in the ether and in the air around PlayStation's ecosystem when it came to indies. That was when like the PlayStation loves indies kind of stuff came out. And it's very similar in my mind to that 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010 period on Xbox 360, when a lot of really seminal downloadable games came out, like Shadow Complex and Limbo and all the rest. So I look at Mercenary Kings as being part of a wave of downloadable, largely indie, though not all indie games that launched on PlayStation, where they were giving them a lot of attention, and a lot of the interesting ones really did bubble to the top. I'm going to talk about one of them later, but for me, Mercenary Kings is so memorable because it seems in hindsight kind of ahead of its time. It's kind of roguelite. It's like grindy and about loot. It's about guns, right? When everyone loves collecting guns and getting more powerful guns. But the side-scrolling nature of it feels almost Metal Sluggish. Not as hard as Metal Slug. And there was something really appealing about it, about the cycle of playing it, about getting through it, about revisiting places, about doing activities. I liked Mercenary Kings. And I wish... well, I don't want to say I wish Sony got back to that space. I just because I think that there are great indie games coming out all the time. I just wish Sony seemed to care more about them. Microsoft was the one that finally broke the mold, particularly with Xbox 360, where it was like, there are these different kinds of games, and there's Geometry Wars is a worthy game, right? And Shadow Complex is a worthy game, and that kind of seeped into Sony's ecosystem later with games like Journey, Flower. These really worthy games. And I feel like these days, because the ecosystem is so flooded with trash, that a game like Mercenary Kings is simply harder to find. And so the onus should be on Sony and its various third-party partners to make sure that these kinds of games bubble to the top. Because when I go to the PS4 and PS5 stores, and I go down them all the time, and I'm always buying shit on them and just looking, there's just nonsense there. And it makes you wonder if a game like Mercenary Kings would have ever had a chance in this ecosystem, wherein it had the double whammy of Sony's attention and a more vacant store on which to launch. So shout out to Mercenary Kings and shout out to Tribute Games. Oh, that's funny. If you're watching the video, I actually have my they sent me this because I'm friendly with them. My Panzer Paladin Tribute from Tribute, their like special edition, which comes on like an NES cartridge. Kind of neat. Now I want to put this all away carefully. Okay. All right, number 23. I put Days Gone. I like open world games. I like checkbox games. I think Days Gone is no doubt that kind of game. It's kind of like a shitty way to talk about games in a way, but it's the same thing where we talk about walking simulators, and that is a pejorative, but it really shouldn't be. It's like, okay, it's a walking simulator. I know what you're talking about. I really like certain walking simulators. I really like Gone Home, right? Really liked, what was the follow-up about the space station? I like that one too. But anyway, Days Gone, 2019, Bend Studio, their last game. They're working apparently on something new now, and also they're kind of in the news recently because Siphon Filter is coming to the PlayStation Classics, and that was amongst their first games. Although when the first Siphon Filter came out, I think they were still Eidetic. I don't think Sony owned them yet. Anyway, Days Gone is unique in a way that another game on my list is unique, and I'll talk about later, in that the United States is a really worn out setting for everything. And I think that really shines through in games. I think that's why, like Mad Men, I always bring up Mad Men. It's interesting because it's a period piece about the United States. It's not about now or whatever. It's just boring. Just meh. I'm just sick of it. Urban New York, rural middle of the country, coastal California. It's like, okay, already go somewhere else. And the reality is that one of the great things about the United States is there is an amazing amount of geographic diversity in our country. We just don't get to see it too often. And you know what one of those places happens to be? Oregon. And seeing a game take place in basically Bend, Oregon, Eastern Oregon, was really cool. I think that's half the reason why the game worked and was able to overcome some of its shortcomings. And I don't think that there were many shortcomings in terms of gameplay, in my opinion. I think the greatest shortcoming was the zombies, the freakers. Little tired, a little bit boring. But what wasn't boring was the setting. What wasn't boring were the motorcycles. What wasn't boring, in my opinion, was the story or the characters. I liked some of those characters. And the tentative connection to Siphon Filter, I thought, was interesting. And it's a shame that they're unlikely to ever explore it. Although we often talk about one-off games. And I think that it's cool to embrace that, especially if you know that they tried and they simply couldn't get something off the ground. It's like, okay, so let's look at Days Gone as an all-encompassing single package. How did it do? How do we look back at it? And when I think about other one-offs like The Order 1886 or things like that, I'm like, oh, we'll look at Days Gone much more positively. In fact, one of the most positive one-off games from first party or second party. Shout out to Days Gone. Shout out to what it tried to do. I think that it took too long. And expectations were too high. But I'm happy for Ben that they survived. They kind of gained control. A lot of tumult at the top of the company, as we know, which is unfortunate. We had Jeff Ross to talk about some of that on. But had to put Days Gone on the list. Number 23. Number 22 is The Messenger. Now, The Messenger came out in 2018. We got it on PlayStation in 2019. That's when I played it. It comes from Sabotage Studios. They're working now on that role-playing game, Sea of Stars. Yes, I'm like the fucking oldest person in the world now. Okay. The Messenger was neat because for me, it broke the mold of the Metroidvania by making it more Ninja Gaiden-ish and then Metroidvania-ish. And in fact, it's funny because I know that they were in development at the same time, and so I would not say that one was copying the other. But that game Cyber Ninja which came out earlier this year, was kind of similar in my mind, where was Cyber Shadow earlier this year? No, it was last year. What the fuck am I talking about? Cyber Shadow came out last year. And it kind of reminded me of that, where it's this ode to this thing. The visuals are kind of on point, but you can, if you're proficient in NES games and SNES games, Genesis games, Master System games, you'll understand everything that they're pulling from these games. And I just think that Sabotage's The Messenger is maybe the best of the bunch, or at least, and in terms of truly old school styled games, I think that, as opposed to not downloadable or 2D, that's not necessarily old school. I think The Messenger really resonated with me, and I'm happy that the role-playing game they're working on somehow connects to this, although I think they're thousands of years apart, which I'm fascinated by. And I feel like when games like this do well, it gives me heart that games that I make and that we are passionate about at Lilymo have a chance of finding a real audience. Probably not a very big chance. Like with Super Perils of Baking, which comes out June 3rd, and I'm not trying to promote it, I'm just saying it comes out soon, 10 days. I feel like if we could just find the audience, that game would be big. Not this big. It's not as good as these games. Like I'm not saying it is, but it's a great game that does something unique and special. And I'm just saying that because I feel like when I see a game that's from a small studio that's quainter, that was cheaper, that people shrug off and say, "Oh, I don't want to buy. This is gonna buy. I'll come with Game Pass. I'm not gonna buy anything." I feel like, well, there's a little bit of hope for us. So shout out to Sabotage and The Messenger, really cool game. And always invoking Ninja Gaiden is going, especially old school, the Ninja Gaiden trilogy on NES. I mean, that's good shit. You're invoking that, you're going to be a friend of mine. All right. Number 21 was WayForward's River City Girls, which came out in 2019. Brawler. Have to have a brawler on here to represent one of my old loves. We don't see a lot of brawlers anymore. That's why I'm so excited about that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles collection from Konami this summer, because some of those are brawlers, and I'm excited to play them with Micah. And then, of course, there's that Turtles arcade inspired brawler. Is Tribute doing that? They might be doing that, actually. The guys that did Mercenary Kings. I could be making that up. I don't know. But River City Girls is charming. Arc System Works, the fighting studio, is working as publisher on this, and they own actually the so-called Kunio-kun games. So like Super Dodgeball, and all that shit that's in this universe. And of course, River City Ransom. And River City Girls is just a more modern continuation of that. It's fucking awesome. It's a really wonderful brawler. And what I really liked about it the most was how it fused a few things that you don't really see in brawlers into the game and made it make sense. The game itself is kind of open world. Now that sounds like you don't want that, and you don't. But generally speaking, but it's cool to be able to go back. Like there's a little quests or things you can miss. Like you're not tied to this one path. In brawlers, the game kind of just takes you through to the next and takes you through to the next. In this game, it's a little different. And I liked that because Streets of Rage 4, which I played through with Michael last summer, which is a new brawler and was awesome. That was a much more traditional brawler, and that's awesome too. But River City Girls kind of allowed you to take things a little slower. It's got the role-playing game mechanics, the experience points, and the equipment, and all the rest. You can play it by yourself or with someone else. I played it by myself. I just think, and I know that the characters were charming too. And by the way, I must say, I love the idea of like the boyfriend, these girls' boyfriends kind of being taken prisoner, and they're like kind of hapless, and they have to go after them. And it's not that I like need the role reversal stuff to like balance the scales. It's just cute and fun. They're like badass girls. Like they're just beating the shit out of these people. And yeah, so shout out to River City Girls. That's my 21st game from WayForward. Wonderful old school studio. Number 20 is another old school style game, Bloodstain Curse of the Moon 2, which came out in 2020 from Indie Creates. Now, Curse of the Moon 2 is a sequel, as it sounds, to Curse of the Moon, which came out in 2019. And that, in and of itself, is a prelude to Ritual of the Night, so, as you guys might remember, Koji Igarashi leaves Konami. He's the producer of Castlevania. He kind of creates his own thing with Bloodstain. Bloodstain Ritual of the Night is kind of the spiritual successor in some ways to Symphony of the Night, the 1997 classic PS1 Castlevania game. However, I take umbrage with that because, unfortunately, Bloodstain Ritual of the Night, while really good, is 2.5D, which just immediately makes it look cheap, in my opinion, and not as cool. What was cool, though, and Indie Creates made that game too, but what was cool about the prelude, Curse of the Moon, and its sequel, Curse of the Moon 2, where these games were based very much on Castlevania 3. And for old school Castlevania NES fans, everyone knows that that's the great Castlevania game. That's one of the great NES games of all time. And, multiple characters and some non-linearity, choosing your stages and all of that, totally invoked in Bloodstain Curse of the Moon. And they did it again in Curse of the Moon 2. It's just a wonderful, fun, hard, replayable, old school side scroller in the spirit of Castlevania. It is absolutely stunningly beautiful. I know when people look at games like this, they're like, well, I want to see my 3D Unreal Engine 5 games. And I'm like, this is fucking art. Look at it. All animated pixel by pixel, hand by hand. It's fucking beautiful. The sprites are beautiful. The background art is beautiful. Shout out to Indie Creates. What a wonderful studio. Love those guys. And Curse of the Moon 2 is just, I almost wanted to put them both on here, but I couldn't. All right, number 19 is Ghost of Tsushima. 2020's Ghost of Tsushima. Arguably PlayStation 4's, well, not inarguably really, PlayStation 4's swan song from Sucker Punch, best known for Sly Cooper and infamous, of course. It's funny because in some way I was doubtful of Ghost of Tsushima. I felt like Sony was being really quiet. I think now with hindsight, like in the lead up to it, I think in hindsight though, what we realize now, or what I realize now in 2022, so it's almost a year, it's been, I don't know, 20 months or something like that. 21 months since the game came out, is that Sony's just different now. It has nothing to really even do with the pandemic, because I think it started before that, but they're just quiet. They just say what they say and do what they do. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of rhyme or reason to some of it. And when we read the MPDs and these other sales figures every month and the PlayStation download charts and all of that, it doesn't seem to matter. I'm not saying they're Coca-Cola, where like Coca-Cola doesn't need to advertise. They do because they think they should, but they don't need to. PlayStation does need to advertise, and they should advertise, and but the quiet is part of the fun. And I think I didn't realize that with Ghost of Tsushima, especially because it was coming out, The Last of Us Part 2 was coming out, and then several months this was coming out. So I just thought it was going to be overshadowed, and that didn't happen at all. It seemed like a lot of people took to this game more than The Last of Us Part 2. I don't know. They're different. I don't want to compare them necessarily. I thought the story was wonderful. The setting, again, we're talking about settings. I mean, this is cool. This is unique. This is something we don't see. 3D, beautifully rendered. Old Japan, ancient Japan. And I like that Sucker Punch cannily presented potential problems right up front, where they were like, listen, we are a studio in Washington. We're not Japanese. We understand that the armor doesn't fit into the time period. Some of these things don't really quite make sense. We're trying to make a cool video game with respect for both the subject matter and the gamer, who wants something cool and interesting. It's not going to be totally right, but they did something really cool. And I think the thing I loved about Ghost of Tsushima the most was and Chris always talks about this, is the kind of the spirited and sort of built-in way. How do I put it? The immersive and the nonchalant, let's say, way that the game brings you from place to place, with the foxes, with the birds, and all these different things. That sounded on paper not as cool as it ended up being. And while I'm not one of these people that, it was like when Elden Ring came out and everyone was sending around like pictures with like mega UI all over like game screens, making fun of UI and whatever. I'm not one of those people. I like having a pretty robust UI, things to see, a mini map and all of that. I don't mind that. But there's something to be said about cleanliness in certain games. And I know that was very attractive in Elden Ring for a lot of people. The clean screen, the whispers, only the whispers of where to go or what to do, much more arcane than Ghost of Tsushima, of course, in Elden Ring. But I think Ghost of Tsushima is kind of built in the same spirit. And I also like how the game tried to settle you in and make you see more than just the combat and the gameplay, which were great. But like writing haikus and traveling, finding the different shrines. And I don't know. I dug Ghost of Tsushima a lot. And while I know that they supported it with Legends, I didn't play that. I think it's almost inevitable we'll get a sequel to this, and I'll be interested to see it on PlayStation 5. Number 18 is Resident Evil 7, which came out in 2020. And it's funny because I put 2020 here on my list. That's Resident Evil 8. Resident Evil 7 came out in 2017. The interesting thing about Resident Evil 7 to me was the revitalization of something so important. Resident Evil was on its last legs, I think, after Resident Evil 6. Not in terms of sales, but in terms of respect. And you can't keep running something like that into the ground, like I feel like they did with 5 and 6, and not expect that there's going to be some consequence somewhere down the line. And I really feel like someone at Capcom, or a group of people at Capcom, really figured it out around this time, maybe a little bit before. And before you knew it, you had mega hits like Monster Hunter and all the rest coming out. But you also had a whole resurgence concurrent to that with Resident Evil. And it's gone through 4 games at this point since that time, with 7 and 8, and of course 2 and 3 Remake. Resident Evil 7 is, again, all about the setting and understanding that the key point of Resident Evil games, in my opinion, is to treat the setting as a character. Nothing else will do. And Louisiana, the bayou, that swampy mansion or house, that swampy locale, it's very cool. It's very memorable. And while I think the story in Village kind of, later on goes a little weird, with another game with an interesting setting, I thought Resident Evil 7 was a wonderful return to form and a really highly recommended game. I love survival horror. I just don't think that there are that many games that really do it extraordinarily well. And it seems like, for the most part, Capcom has kind of taken back the banner from not only independent studios like Red Barrels and others, but studios like Tango and others that were trying to kind of infringe on their space. And I think they've done wise, especially in the gap Konami left when they canceled Silent Hills and the whole PT thing, to just say, like, well, we'll run the ball as much as possible. And I think that they're certainly very happy that they did. So Resident Evil 7 was the beginning of that. Number 17, in looking back at my list, I'm not sure if I should have been allowed to include this, but because it's technically an expansion, but it is a standalone expansion, and so I was comfortable enough including it. It's Wolfenstein Old Blood. This came out in 2015, and it's fucking great. There's something, I don't know what to say about this that I didn't already say about the New Order at 25, other than that when Wolfenstein 2 came out, which was 2017, that to me was a pretty big step down. Not in terms of production value, but in terms of feeling. Like, it didn't have the same spirit. And there's some really cool shit in that game too, like going to Venus and like seeing Hitler. There's a lot of cool shit in Wolfenstein 2. But the kind of interstitial Old Blood standalone was awesome. And I would argue, because I was trying to figure this out. I was going through my trophies, and not that I play a lot of standalone stuff, but in my mind, that was like the best standalone content, derived from a major game, or a standalone content from a mainline release of something else that we saw on the console. And it's kind of a more obscure release. So I have to give a shout out. Machine Games is on here twice. Wolfenstein Old Blood. Number 16 is Hollow Knight. And what's funny about this is, so this came out in 2017, but we got it on PlayStation in 2018, and that's when I played it. This comes from Team Cherry. They're working on the eagerly anticipated follow-up to this, Silk Song, which is, unfortunately, I was reading about it earlier, not officially announced for PlayStation yet. Coming to Switch, of course. I assume that they have a deal there. But was disappointed that they're not bringing it everywhere immediately. And it's especially disappointing because the longer it takes for this to come out, if they have some sort of exclusivity pocket with Nintendo, the longer it's going to take for us to get it on PS4, PS5. Hollow Knight is pretty brilliant. And I think everyone, or many people who have played it, who are into Metroidvanias and or 2D side-scrolling action games, I think that pretty much everyone gets it. It not only plays really well, it's not only beautiful, and it's not only a satisfactory Metroidvania. it's really bizarrely weird and deep. There's much more to it than meets the eye. I don't quite know because I don't like reading. Sometimes I can't help it, but I don't typically like reading fan theories and like what people think is going on in something and whatever. It kind of ruins it for me. I've talked many times about, you know, Neil Druckmann kind of ruining The Last of Us's ending for me when he told me that my interpretation of it wasn't correct in his mind because he wrote it. So if it's not correct, then it's not correct. But we don't really have that kind of access to like J.R.R. Tolkien or something when we're interpreting the allegories in the Lord of the Rings or something like that. So we can't quite have it ruined for us. And so with all games, I try to kind of not read into it too much around me, and I kind of just try to play the game. There was something melancholic about Hollow Knight that stuck with me, and the one disappointment I have is I beat it, but I didn't get the platinum in it. It's very hard. There's that whole arena that you have to do, you know, with like endless waves and all this shit. And that game is tough, man. I mean, it's not one of those games you can brute force your way through, which I also appreciate. Like, you really do have to play a more sophisticated brand of Metroidvania to play this as well. It almost, like, because the thing about Symphony of the Night and Super Metroid, which are kind of the seminal games in the genre from the 90s, neither of them are very hard. In fact, you can make them, like many role-playing games, easier, much easier, if you just patiently do things and go about your business. There's some of that in any game in the genre, and that's true with Hollow Knight, but that only goes so far. Cyber Shadow is the same thing, where it's like you got to kind of know how to play to get through this. You can make your character strong, but there's only so much you can do. And I imagine it's kind of what happens in 3D games like Elden Ring as well, although I don't enjoy that grind as much. So it would be fun to go back to Hollow Knight and try to get those trophies. However, you really have to start from the beginning, because at least I would have to develop that skill and that muscle memory again. You can't just go into it. And that makes it more difficult indeed. Take a little drink here. Should we keep the video going? We'll keep the video going. All right. Where are we here? Number 15. Ratchet and Clank Remake. Came out in 2016. The original Ratchet and Clank 2002. I really, when we did episode 200. Now we're getting into things that we actually like made the list, so it feels almost a little redundant. But Ratchet and Clank was this realization that I think Sony had made at the time and continues to make to this day with the acquisition of studios like Bluepoint and kind of the endeavor to remake The Last of Us and all this other stuff, that their IP and their licenses and individual games are in fact moments that you can present to an audience. And when the moment has passed and enough time has passed and distance, you can kind of repackage that moment and fix it and do something special with it. Now, there's the idea of the straight up remake, and that's more what Bluepoint does, and I appreciate that. But then there's the artistically licensed remake that can really only come from the original studio that makes the games, and that's why Ratchet is so interesting and so unique, because it's the same studio that's always made it. No one else has ever made a Ratchet game, or a core one anyway. So, because like I think Ready at Dawn did one, whatever. But as far as like the core Ratchet and Clank games that we know, these are, you know, what they are, and they come from the same studio and some of the same minds, and so they can kind of fix things. And I think 2016's Ratchet and Clank Remake was a reminder that the original is great, but could use some tweaking, that the tweaking makes it better, that it's not only the graphical fidelity of the game or the load times or whatever that makes the new version better, that they actually did make it better in spirit, not only literally. And I dig that, because that's a risk. It's a risk, and it didn't necessarily have to work out. And I think that it unanimously did. And I also think that $40 price point, seems like PlayStation is loath to explore that price point anymore. I guess I get it. I wonder if they look at Ratchet and Clank and they're like, we could have probably sold many of these at $60. But I truly believe that a lot of people took the jump rather, because the game was more affordable at $40. And I would like to see more releases like that, because I know it's, again, the vernacular suggests that that's like an A game or a double A game, but that suggests a level of quality that is far surpassed by Ratchet and Clank Remake, which is very much a triple A game. It's just that they didn't charge you $60 for it. And so I feel like it kind of affected, I feel like that kind of affected its perception in some way. It's kind of similar to what I was saying earlier about downloadable games, wherein some people believed in them and some people didn't. And we don't have that conversation anymore because we don't really even look at the difference between those two things anymore. I think there's something to be said about this too, about quality and pricing, about kind of trying to give someone value once in a while, and also selling the franchise to a whole new generation that went a little while without a real Ratchet and Clank game. I mean, you had Into the Nexus and stuff, but really A Crack in Time was really that tentpole game, and that was 2009. So Ratchet and Clank Remake, number 15. Number 14 is The Division 2, which came out in 2019, follow-up to the 2016 service shooter from Ubisoft-owned Massive Games, now working on the Avatar game, the AAA Avatar game that's apparently coming out this fall. Who knows? Seems like PlayStation has the marketing bucks behind it. We will see. So The Division 2 is one of those games that I probably shouldn't like as much as I do, but I really authentically and earnestly do like it. The original draw to me, especially when the first Division came out, was this idea of societal collapse in the United States. When you get into that kind of shit, where it's literally the federal government, it's not like, the end of the world, but there's some sort of a mystery and intrigue about what has happened, and that's good stuff. And that can take place in the United States. That's why Jericho is one of my favorite TV shows, because when you utilize familiar surroundings and then you leverage them into something new and unique and exciting that's relatable, I can get down with that. And so this idea of, in the original one, New York City succumbing to this dollar flu, this permanent Christmas time, because it was Black Friday when the flu took over and everyone started going down. And then the sequel taking place in Washington, getting away from that location a little bit, following up on the story. I found The Division 2 to be totally and completely satisfactory. I know it's meant to be played with others, but I don't want to play it with anyone else. I like playing it by myself. I like the sponginess of the enemies. I don't always like that, but I like that in The Division. I like the different tools and the different deploying items that you get, and the turrets, and of course we're all drawn into that idea of getting more powerful loot. I know that The Division will continue with the Heartlands free-to-play game that Red Storm is doing, and now old school gamers will know Red Storm was the original Tom Clancy studio that Ubisoft set up to make Tom Clancy games. So it's kind of cool to see The Division go back to them, or to go to them. I don't know where the franchise goes from here, but I can't deny that The Division 2 sucked up scores of hours of my life, and it did. And yeah, I loved it. I love the original one too. But yeah, I really like The Division 2. And that's number 14 on my list. Number 13 on my list is 2019's Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is a remake of the 1998 PS1 sequel to the 1996 original Resident Evil game, known as Biohazard in Japan. Man, I'm one of those people that never really particularly looked at Resident Evil 2 as an important game for me. On PS1, it wasn't until I played Medal of Honor, which was around the same time, that a little later, that I really came to open my mind to shooters on console of any kind. And I was really involved mostly in 2D games and Japanese role-playing games at that time. Now, I like the original Resident Evil. I played Resident Evil 2 and so on. And I played some other, Silent Hill and the other games that came out. But they just weren't seminal products to me. It wasn't until I played Resident Evil 4 on a GameCube that I really fell in love with the Resident Evil game. And it wasn't again until I didn't fall in love with the Resident Evil game again until the aforementioned Resident Evil 7 in 2016. Resident Evil 2 Remake, though, is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal game. It's moody and dark and atmospheric and campy. The puzzles and everything just works. And I really enjoyed the quiet solitude that I experienced playing it. Especially because I don't have, very similar to when I played Remake back on GameCube back in the day. Like, I didn't have the memory of the first game deep-seated enough for me to know what was like, oh, this is an ode to this, or this is quite right, or this. I just didn't have that mapping in my mind. So I think that both removed expectations and made a truly new experience for me, which I think a lot of other people that also loved Resident Evil 2 Remake, they didn't have that, because it would be like if someone remade BioShock. How am I not going to see the original BioShock everywhere? Because I know that game so well. I just don't know Resident Evil 2 like that. It was a great game. Wonderful. And highly recommended to anyone that likes survival horror. I found it quite playable. It's quite replayable because they have Resident Evil games are always good about that, but the unlockable items and the infinite ammo and then this and the that. So there's a lot of reasons to go back. You have to beat it multiple times to get the platinum. I didn't get the platinum in it. Maybe one day. Some people say it's pretty easy. Easier than it seems, since you can run through the game with like infinite grenade launcher and shit. There's really no problems. Number 12 was my 2019 Game of the Year, and it's Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark from a small 2-person studio named Six Eyes. I think they're a husband and wife, but I could be wrong about that. For some reason, which we go over in great detail on the show pretty often, strategy role-playing games are not common. Turn-based strategy role-playing games. Not as common as you would think that they would or could be, and it suggests to me two things. Either that there really is not a market for these games, which is possible. Like, and it's always that Metroid problem, right? Like, Metroid is not very big, but because we're hardcore gamers, we feel like it's huge every time Metroid comes out, but they're not big. In fact, the new Metroid game outsold Metroid Prime, which is pretty crazy because that was a classic GameCube game, but I digress. Fell Seal was the first time in years that I had played a Final Fantasy Tactics-like strategy turn-based role-playing game that felt right and was really good. And God, have I tried so many different ones. And some of them are better than others. You know, there were really shitty ones like Natural Doctrine. The Mercenary games are a lot better. They're kind of budget, but of course people like Fire Emblem over on Nintendo platforms. But for me, the last one that I played before this, that I really played and really, that was new and that I was like, this is right, was Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together on PSP, which I think came out in like 2011 and was a remake of a Super Famicom game. So again, that just goes to show you, I don't think it was even a remake. I think it was a port with like a new translation because I don't think we ever got it over here. The first Ogre game I played was on N64. Which was a Person of Lordly Caliber. People that remember that game. So when Fell Seal came out, I was like, is this really what it seems like? I can't believe it. Because for other genres that I really love, they're well visited, and some even would say kind of trite at this point, like Metroidvanias and others, the old school kind of revolution and everything that came. But this remains kind of unknown. And actually lingering in that NVIDIA leak is this notion that Final Fantasy Tactics might come back, which is like a no fucking brainer. In the meantime, I thought Fell Seal was a great placeholder, and I want more. I think it's a super good game. They released a DLC pack, which I played some of, but I would really love for more. Some people criticize the art style in the game. You guys can look at it yourself. Some people said it looked a little flash gamey. I personally thought it was beautiful. I had no issues with it at all. I would have preferred sprites, but this was a nice solution, and they're a tiny little team. So, whatever. But yeah, Fell Seal Arbiter's Mark was my 2019 Game of the Year. That's just a phenomenal, phenomenal game. Really hope that we get another one. And highly recommend it to anyone that's a Final Fantasy Tactics, Tactics Ogre, Fire Emblem, so on, Valkyria Chronicles, Jeanne d'Arc. If you're into any of that stuff, check it out. Disgaea, of course. All right, number 11 is 2018's Far Cry 5. Now, when I was talking about Days Gone, I promised that I would talk about another American location that really nailed it. And I thought Montana, Big Sky Country, was a really cool place to visit in a video game, and particularly in Far Cry, which is really best known for its more tropical locales, its watery, oceanic, seafaring locales, jungle locales, whatever. Far Cry 4 goes to like the mountains of Southeast Asia. This one brings it back to Montana or back to the United States into Montana. And I really felt like the familiarity of the game, kind of the self-deprecation of the game, some of the messaging of the game I thought was pretty neat and cool to kind of fight American villains. Because I do think that one of the things that Far Cry does that's a little strange is kind of, I don't think they mean it like this, but it comes off a little white savior-ish. It does, right? Like the white guys, party guys coming in, he's fucking everything up or whatever, and the Hispanic man or the Asian man or whatever. It's fine, but it's very 80s action movie, very tropey. And I felt like Far Cry 5 really wasn't tropey at all. And you knew that when everyone started complaining about it, and a lot of people didn't realize that the overt reference was to, evangelical Christianity in the 80s and 90s. And that's interesting to explore, why not? So I really liked Far Cry 5 for embracing its historicity, let's say, that there is something worth exploring in rural America where things can quietly it's like Children of the Corn, which is one of my favorite horror stories, the Stephen King story, and of course the movie later on. What's eerie about that is not only that it's kids and all this shit, but that the adults are gone, or there's just no one around. There's things can foment before you know what happens. And while it's hard to imagine that happening in the internet connected modernity of today, with cell phones and cell phone towers and Skylink and all this, Starlink or whatever the fuck it's called, and all these different things, I just feel like it's cool to try. It's why we often lament on Knockback, our retro show, that horror movies typically have to take place in the middle of nowhere and go out of their way to remove technology and functionality, like Until Dawn did in 2015, but a lot of old horror movies, and why horror doesn't work so well anymore, because it's not possible to imagine that you just wouldn't have any way to get help or any way to reach the outside world or whatever. And so those that figure it out, and there are those that have figured out how to do it, are the winners. And I think that Far Cry 5, far beyond the whole clear reference to David Koresh and all that stuff, I just think it's deeper than that. I think it's fun, and it's disappointing that it was kind of maimed by a journalist class in gaming that didn't get it, and that seems to hate everything that could potentially be popular. Far Cry 5 suffered from that, certainly not commercially, but I think a little bit critically. But I love it at number 11. Okay, number 10 is Detroit Become Human from 2018. And by the way, every game from here, with the exception of one, will have been on the original list. So we don't have to linger too much, but I want to say something about each of them nonetheless. Detroit Become Human is a return to form for Quantic Dream following what I thought was a weaker offering with 2013's Beyond Two Souls on PS3, which was a disappointment because Heavy Rain on PS3 is one of the most important games on the console, and I think an amazing game. it's very wonky and weird, but so clever and interesting, particularly through the lens of the time. And even now, Detroit, I think, brings Quantic Dream's theory of the case to full realization, especially with the idea of mapping out the butterfly effect and showing it visually, kind of taking away a little bit of the mystery of what exists and what could be. I felt like that was fun with Beyond and that was fun with Heavy Rain, but not too fun, because if you really wanted to see the whole game, then you needed to kind of go and find help. At least this game shows you that, like, you might not know how to get this path, but there is a path off this chapter that you can unlock. And I just thought that little design choices like that gamified something works for Detroit. And I know that gamification and all of that is just something that David Cage as an auteur just tries to stay away from, but I'm glad that they embrace it with Detroit Become Human, because I think it makes for their strongest game. I think I like Heavy Rain more. I would like to see Heavy Rain remade. I think that would be fucking awesome. But Detroit is a really clever piece of gaming. Well written and interesting and dynamic, choice driven completely, as we know. And I loved it. And while I think that I like stuff about rogue AI and kind of the ethical concerns and the military concern, I like that kind of stuff. And so Detroit, I think, spoke to me on that level too, because it's about that. It's about consciousness and the creation of consciousness and the implications of that. That's almost, for me, that's hard to fuck up. And they certainly didn't. Number 9 on my list is Control from 2019 from Remedy. I'm not a Remedy guy, or at least I wasn't. I guess I am now. You know, I'm not an Alan Wake person. I didn't really care about Max Payne. So Control was a bit of a shot in the dark for me, pardon the pun, because I didn't know quite what I was getting. I was also intrigued by its connection to 505, which is kind of a smaller publisher that doesn't do very many important games. In fact, they've done some garbage, or, you know, published and funded some garbage. So I knew someone that worked for them once that used to, like, literally steer me away from some of their games when I would reach out about them, which is incredible. So with Control kind of linking up with 505, it's like, well, what is this? And it was a long time since Alan Wake and American Nightmare, so we were kind of waiting for that. And of course, Alan Wake itself took a long time to make. So you're kind of wondering, like, what's going on with Remedy? What's up with them? But for something like 40 million euros, which is nothing to make a AAA game, they made Control, and it's great. It's a wonderful third-person action shooter. The telekinesis and kind of affecting your environment, superb. Upgrade trees and all of that taking place within this building, which itself is a character, constantly changing and adapting and altering. And this mind fuck of a story that seems to take some inspiration from from Quantum Break, which was their game between Alan Wake and Control. And really injecting lots of story, lots of lore, live action stuff. Just, you could read this, and I did, because when I was preparing for the spoiler cast back in 2019, I spent like an entire evening in LA just reading the game, like all the collectibles, everything I found. I'm like, my God, there's a lot of stuff in here. They're not fucking around. And so that really put Remedy on the map for me. And I like that they danced with the one that brought them. I don't know what the IP rule would be and who owns what for as far as licensing is concerned, but Control 2 is in development with 505, which I think is cool. And I think they're doing a second spinoff with 505 as well. Good to dance with the one that brought you. Imagine what they can do with twice that much, which would still be pretty cheap for a AAA game. You're starting to get in the more expensive range, but remember, the big AAA games that we're looking forward to the most, or that a lot of people are looking forward to the most, are hundreds of millions of dollars to make. And so I think that's what's most insane about Control, was that it's a AAA game without really the AAA bona fides, because it didn't have the roster or the money or the time put behind it that would suggest it is what it is, but it is what it is. Shout out to Control. I love that game. Number 8, I put 2017's Horizon Zero Dawn on the list from Guerrilla Games. We've talked so much about this game. I don't know what else there is to say about it. We've talked at length about the change in Guerrilla from Killzone to Horizon. We've talked about the amazing action, the character, the world, the robot dinosaurs, and how it all really comes to fruition in some way and suggests a third game even with Forbidden West earlier this year. Horizon Zero Dawn was not a surprise to me because I played it at E3 the year before really extensively, and I knew that when people got their hands on the game, it was going to be big because I was like, this is hot. Like, this is really, really something else that, remember, when we go back, let's go back 5-6 years, we're not quite as inundated by these kinds of games generally or on our ecosystem as we are now. And I think a lot of that has to do with Horizon kind of continuing to prove a formula that had been proven by others by that point, but had certainly been proven to a high degree with Horizon Zero Dawn. I like the character of Aloy. I like the tragedy of the world. I like, again, a US setting, but not really important that it's the United States. This tribalistic setting that invokes American Indians, but also others. There's a lot of visual flair, a lot of gameplay, chops, good design choice, and all the rest, mocap and voice acting, which I think is taken to a whole nother level in the sequel. 2017's Horizon Zero Dawn is a must-play for any PlayStation fan, in my opinion. Number 7 is a game that didn't make the list. Out of this top 10, I told you that one of them didn't make the final list, and this is the one. It's 2015's Dying Light from Techland. Dying Light is awesome. I can't speak to the sequel yet. It was pretty broken when it came out. I don't want to speak and get ahead of myself until I play it, so I'll leave that for another time. But I will say that 2015's Dying Light is one of the greatest open world games ever, and a fucking absolute marvel, really, when you consider Techland is, like, when you think, like, who is Techland? Who were they? Well, it's kind of the same thing that happened with another Polish team, CD Projekt, where it's like, who the fuck are these guys? Well, then Witcher 3 comes out, same year, months apart, 2015, and they're on the scene. And suddenly, Eurojank, the term Eurojank and all the shit that would come out of some of these studios is like a thing of the past. Yes, Dying Light's about zombies. Boring. I agree. But the setting, pseudo-Turkish, which I thought was cool. I don't think I've ever played a game in that setting before. And the parkour and the exploration is fucking great. If you think you can climb it, you can. And I love that kind of shit. And the day-night cycle, I like day-night cycles. Sometimes I think games don't really take advantage of them very well. I don't know exactly what I want from them. Like, you can have the Castlevania 2 day-night cycle where the enemies get like twice as hard. Or you can like increase, I guess, the rate of encounters and all the rest. I don't know what you would do, but I think a lot of games just kind of have a day-night cycle, especially open worlds. What I like about this game's day-night cycle is how lethal the world becomes at night. It's truly scary. Like, I think this game is pretty frightening at night. You don't want to be outside at night. There are times when you have to go out at night, and what I like about it is that especially if you play it with some sound, you can hear the enemies around you because basically these enemies become like these zombie enemies become super fast and aggressive and everything at night, and they're stalking, and you have to kind of just like slink around them. And if they see you, you're just booking it, climbing and clambering and jumping and trying to get away, but you can't look back. No time to look back. Dying Light rules. Awesome game. Check it out. Number 6 on my list is Death Stranding from 2019. We've sucked at the balls of this game so much that I don't know what else to really say about it, because especially Chris and I, really like this game. And I think Death Stranding is a surprise. It's largely non-violent, which is very appealing to me. As far as I know, the only time the game forces you to fight are during the boss fights, and I'm pretty sure that is the only time I fought something in the entire game. I would usually, if I got saw by an enemy or whatever, I'd just run and try to get away. it's pretty audacious to say we're going to make a game about delivering shit. And it's not one of these delivery simulator, because people like that kind of stuff, and that's totally fine. It's not that. This is a straight up earnest game with heart and soul and spirit about delivering things. But it's about fostering community. It's about togetherness and severance between people. It's about memories and loss. It's about a lot of different stuff. I feel like I'm skeptical about this purported sequel that they're working on. That's been leaked like several times now. But I don't mind the idea of going back, because we were talking about one-offs, about Days Gone being a one-off. And if Death Stranding were left alone, that would probably be the most famous PlayStation associated one-off ever. But I don't think they're going to leave it alone, and that's okay. I want to see what they can do. But there's a lot of emotion in forcing people to figure out ways to play games, especially in the concept of 3D spaces as third person, where you're not necessarily trying to hurt anything or chase anything or find anything either. You're really just trying to get somewhere. When I'm so sick of the games are art argument. I'm sick of it. I think it's so old and trite. It's fucking generations old at this point in games terms. But Death Stranding's proof that games are so much deeper than people give them credit for. And the only way you would ever really know is to play it. You can't look at it and realize it. You can't watch it and see and understand. Just like I feel like the same with Journey. Journey was unreviewable in some way because it's like, you just got to play it. Just play it. Don't worry about anything that anyone says. Just play it and come back in 90 minutes. Now, Death Stranding requires much, much more than that out of you. But I find the results satisfying. And I'm glad that this game did better than I thought and was better than I thought it was, because I was certainly a skeptic. No doubt. Not only about Kojima's chops, but about the time that they had in making this game. But they did it. All right. Number 5. We're in the top 5 now. Number 5 is Spider-Man 2018 from Insomniac. What a wonderful, fun, fluid game to play. Just swinging through the different buildings is phenomenal. Combat, much better in my opinion than the Arkham games. And I like Batman as a character, and I like the Arkham games, but Spider-Man's pretty cool. And I always kind of liked Spider-Man too, but I'm talking a lot about Hogwarts Legacy recently, about how that might be my angle into figuring out Harry Potter fandom and figuring out what it's all about and trying to immerse myself in that. And I'm never going to buy a Spider-Man comic book. I'm probably never going to watch like a one-off or a Spider-Man TV show or anything like that. But the exposure I get to Spider-Man from the occasional movie or the occasional video game really invigorates me as far as like the worth and the value of this character. I like him. I like what he's about. I like the setting of New York City in this case, especially because it's Queens where he's from, which is more Long Islandish and in and of itself pretty unique. But that he's a good person, that he found himself in extraordinary situations through no fault of his own, that he's a kid. And I don't know. I just think that this was a really shocking game. And I wonder if Disney was as shocked as everyone else was. Marvel at the time as well. Marvel still, obviously. Like, were they surprised by how big? Did they think it was going to sell 20 million copies? Did they think it was going to be this tentpole game, this mega important PlayStation exclusive? I don't know. But what I do know is that they opened the purse after that with Spider-Man 2 and Wolverine. So they like their people over there in Insomniac. And Insomniac is basically, for all intents and purposes, especially with Ratchet out now, potentially a Marvel studio moving forward for PlayStation. Number 4 on my list is a launch game from 2013, Resogun. Resogun is a phenomenal example of what simplicity can mean. And that you don't necessarily, like, when I tell someone, or if I were to tell you, Resogun can be beaten in about 25 minutes, which you can. People are like, oh, I don't want to buy that. I don't want to play that. But it's about mastering it. If you're not into that sort of thing, I can understand why Resogun might not be for you. But Resogun is about taking what it is. The game plays out the same every time, as long as you do certain things. And then you maximize your points by multipliers and by time and all of the rest that you can do. And it becomes an obsession. This is Housemarque's specialty. Remember, at the time, Housemarque was a second party for Sony and was for years and would be for years after this. And while I think that they've made a lot of awesome games, Super Stardust HD, Super Stardust Delta, Dead Nation, Outland, Alien Nation was pretty good, although not my favorite. Nex Machina, Matterfall, they've made a lot of games. Resogun to me stands out as maybe the best of the bunch. And was just an addictive crack-like game when PlayStation 4 came out. I just absolutely ate that game up and will always have a lot of nostalgia for it. But the reality is that everyone knows Resogun's awesome. And we have to give a shout out in our list, or I want to do in my list, to a game that's short and sweet. Very well made. Fun. It's a game. I always say, not everything has to be fun. Not every game. We don't play every game for fun per se. I wouldn't describe the feelings I was experiencing in certain games as fun. But I think Resogun is what it is. It's like walking into an arcade and playing, and you're playing for fun. You're not necessarily trying to immerse yourself in the TMNT brawler or the light gun shooter like you would Death Stranding. So I think Resogun serves a purpose. It connects us to that very first cell of video games, which is the game itself. Number 3 on my list is Final Fantasy VII Remake from 2020. We've gushed about this game endlessly too. I don't know what else to say except for this game surprised me. It's one of the most surprising games I've ever played. I did not believe for 1 second that this game was going to be good. I don't know how they saved it from a studio like CyberConnect, which wouldn't have delivered a game like this. No way. And they made something that dared to reimagine maybe their biggest game ever, Square Enix's biggest game ever, in Final Fantasy VII. And they nailed it. They fucking nailed it. There's almost nothing wrong with Final Fantasy VII Remake, which is shocking. Because there was a moment leading up to it where I was like, I'm going to need a clinical clipboard and pens and all sorts of erasers and magnifying glasses and reference manuals, because I'm going to tear this thing the fuck up. I know Final Fantasy VII like the back of my hand, and how dare you? Yes, how dare they indeed. It makes me really excited for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, which I think we're going to be hearing about soon. It makes me hopeful that they consistently understand that the quality is what's most important. If they want to do this in 3 or 4 parts, I think 3 parts is going to be at the least that they're going to be able to do it in, that they need to nail it front to back. Nothing else will do. That's the hard part about releasing a game like Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 1. Can you do it again? Can you do it even better as the stakes are raised, as the story gets crazier, as the world opens up? I mean, we had a fairly linear experience with Final Fantasy VII Remake in terms of Midgar and going from to to fro and place to place. How are they going to do it here? There's a lot to think about, but man, Final Fantasy VII Remake was fucking dope. What a great game. What a really, really great game. And shout out to all 3 girls, but especially Jessie. Number 2 is Red Dead Redemption 2 from 2018. I mean, of course. I really feel like Red Dead Redemption 2 is objectively one of the very best games ever made. I don't know that we can talk in those kinds of terms, generally speaking, but who amongst us like looks at that game and is like, well, this won't do. The only thing I think about Red Dead Redemption 2 that could have been better is the gameplay. And I know that that's a lot. It's like, well, it's a video game. But I think it is one of those examples where the rest of it was so good, so believable, so dense, so detail driven and wonderful that messing around with the controls was but a second thought for me. Especially as you kind of got used to it. You got that Grand Theft Auto feel. A game about, just like the original Red Dead Redemption, a game about the end of a lifestyle is intriguing. It's the same reason why I love Downton Abbey, about modernity striking and destroying something. And there's nothing you can really do about it. And Red Dead Redemption, both games, but 2, they make you feel it. They make you feel it with the flicker of an electric light, right? Like, or a really mighty steam engine. But they make you feel it. And I think Red Dead Redemption 2 is a marvel of video games. Just front to back, what could happen and what the potential is when your parent company has no worries about money or time. And you can just do whatever you feel like you need to do to make the game the best. It doesn't mean you dawdle, but if you need time, you get it. Nothing but the best will do. That's why I feel like Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be something special, because it's just been so long that I feel like they understand the stakes. There are no higher stakes for anyone than them at Rockstar, in my opinion, because the expectations are through the roof for a multi-platform audience. Unlike number 1 on my list, The Last of Us Part 2, in which Naughty Dog has those crushing expectations only from one ecosystem, which at least is probably a little bit of steam out of the pot for them. But my number 1 game, The Last of Us Part 2, love it. Love it. Wonderful. Beautiful. Haunting. Sinister. Thought-provoking. I don't know. I played it twice because I got the platinum in it. You have to play it twice to do that. I wish that they would just bring it to PS5 natively so I would have some reason to play it again. There are parts of this game that made me want to break down crying. They were so sad and so heartfelt. Attention. Remember that term I used? I made up? Production per square inch. Where is it thicker than in The Last of Us Part 2? And I'll just leave it there. Number 1 game. All right, so let me go through the games one more time so you have a list. 25 is Wolfenstein The New Order. 24 is Mercenary Kings. 23 is Days Gone. 22 is The Messenger. 21 is River City Girls. 20 is Bloodstain, Curse of the Moon 2. 19 is Ghost of Tsushima. 18 is Resident Evil 7. 17 is Wolfenstein Old Blood. 16 is Hollow Knight. 15 is Ratchet and Clank Remake. 14 is The Division 2. 13 is Resident Evil 2 Remake. 12 is Felseal Arbiter's Mark. 11 is Far Cry 5. 10 is Detroit Become Human. 9 is Control. 8 is Horizon Zero Dawn. 7 is Dying Light. 6 is Death Stranding. 5 is Spider-Man. 4 is Resogun. 3 is Final Fantasy VII Remake. 2 is Red Dead Redemption. And 1 is The Last of Us Part 2. And this is going into the paper shredder. My friends, that's all we have for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. All I have for this episode. It's just me. No one else is here. Good to get that off my back, though, and, get that out into the world so you can see what a real list looks like. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you, of course, on Sacred Symbols and Sacred Symbols Plus. Much coming up. Excited to talk about the new news, the games, PlayStation Plus, all this stuff. A lot. We'll find many things to talk about, even in this games drought that we're experiencing right now. In the meantime, thank you for your love, kindness, and Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.